Historian Arnold Doyen was old and invalid. Therefore, Prabhupada agreed to visit him at his residence, interested in discussing life after death. Dr. Doyen asked Prabhupada about karma. Most people, he said, were afraid of death. Prabhupada agreed and added that according to a certain astrologer, one of India's recent leaders had taken birth as a dog. So they're afraid they will go down, he said. When Doyen asked if karma could be changed, Prabhupada replied yes, but only by bhakti, devotion to God. Not many people in the West are thinking of this. Prabhupada, they are less intelligent. It is not good. If they take Krishna consciousness, they can continue to work and live in the city, but they can change their consciousness. Then automatically everything will come. Srila Prabhupada asked Dr. Toynbee about the book he was writing, and the professor replied that it concerned ancient Greece's influence on the Greece of today. The Greeks came from India, Prabhupada said. Vedic literature was once all over the world. Gradually, a new type of culture, like this recent partition of India and Pakistan, took place. Prabhupada explained how in the future the governments would fall to rascals and thieves, whose only business would be to exploit the citizens. Food would be scarce, and the government would levy so many taxes that people would be harassed and go to the forest for shelter. Only the God-conscious people would be free. The future would be an ocean of faults, with but one saving factor. Simply by chanting Krishna's name, one could be freed. Even now, Prabhupada said the hippies were going to the forest, and the men were separated from their wives and money, and were going to the hills and forests in disappointment. You can predict the future in this way, Prabhupada said. Arnold Toynbee, in India, did the politicians keep the Vedas? Prabhupada, no, they threw them away. Present Indian politicians are not very satisfied with the Vedas. They threw them in the water. I have started among the Indians Americans, and for the next 10,000 years, Krishna consciousness will increase. Then there will be a gloomy picture of Kali Yuga. 10,000 years is not a short time. It is our duty on behalf of Krishna. So Prabhupada decided to agree to visit the historian Arnold D. And because he was old and he's not able to walk. And so the discussion was mainly about the discussion of life after death and about karma. And they both agreed that everyone was afraid of death. But Prabhupada again added to that, saying that karma could be changed by bhakti, which is devotion to God. And Arnold D points out, saying that not many people are thinking about this because they don't have any idea about it. And Prabhupada says, yes, because they are less intelligent. But Prabhupada has brought to the world the Krishna consciousness, and if they can take to that, they can change their consciousness and they can change their karma. Then everything will automatically come. And Dr. Toynbee was writing a book about ancient Greece's influence on the present Greeks. And Prabhupada explained how the Greeks even had come from India, and the Vedic culture was once all over the world. It was a startup, but then everything partitioned, just like how India and Pakistan happened. How they separated, but the culture was the same. And Prabhupada basically said predicted in the future that governments would start becoming more corrupt. The whole business would just be to exploit the citizens, and he predicted that only for 10,000 years will this there will be devotees of Krishna in this, and then again the picture of Kali Yuga will befall this world. And he also explained how the politicians in India were not using the Vedas; they were just more into modern times. AJ Pro.
Arnold Toynbee, do you travel much? Prabhupada, all over the world. A bearded, a bearded young priest, active in social service, visited Prabhupada, and upon Prabhupada's prodding, debated with him about meat eating and the Bible. During this discussion, Hamsaduda and Pradyumna were citing passages from the Bible against meat eating. Later, after the priest had left, Prabhupada called Hamsaduda back to his room and said, "It was not very good for us to speak on the basis of the Bible. Better we stick to the Gita. Why bother to approach them for compromise or cooperation? They will never be convinced. What is the point of meeting with the Pope? Those inclined to meat eating," Prabhupada said, "could always find some quote in the Bible, such as the covenant with Noah after the flood. We do not even know what ghastly things are occurring in the slaughterhouses," he said. "No one sees these things." The next morning on his walk, Prabhupada continued discussing his talk with the priest. "In the name of religion," Prabhupada said, they're killing. The Bhagavatam says this cheating religion is kicked out and simply worship of God is instated. Devotee. "The priest last night said that Jesus ate meat." Prabhupada. "Then Jesus contradicted himself. He also said, 'Thou shalt not kill.' One shouldn't imitate the Ishvaras. A hippie-type mendicant in India takes ganja and claims to be a devotee of Shiva. No, we should not imitate the powerful controllers." That priest said also, "The Bible does not say 'thou shalt not kill,' but 'thou shalt not murder.'" So I told him that if the word is actually "thou shalt not murder" in the original Hebrew, then Jesus must have been preaching to the 4th class, 10th class men, murderers. And the proof is that they murdered him. So such people, what can they understand about God? When I told him, the priest was silent. He could not answer. Another priest came to see Prabhupada, and again the question came up. Prabhupada asked him, "Then you are in favor of killing?" The priest replied, "Well, it is a fallen world." "It is a fallen world," said Prabhupada, "but we do not have to be among the fallen." The priest cited the covenant with Noah. So Prabhupada's meeting with, if you can scroll up, but Prabhupada's meeting with with this priest, and as they're doing it, they're discussing, meat eating and vegetarianism, and a couple of the devotees start kind of quoting the Bible as evidence that, you shouldn't eat meat. These are different quotes against meat eating. And then so that, after the priest left, Prabhupada said, "Hey, you know what, let's stick to the Gita, right? It's not a good idea for us to talk on the basis of the Bible. Let's stick to the Gita. There's no point, right? We're not going to be able to convince them. There's no point in even meeting with the Pope." And then he meets with another priest, and they're talking about things that were done. Again, talking about meat eating, and Prabhupada says, the Bhagavatam says that, if you're killing, there's, this is cheating, essentially. This cheating religion is kicked out, and you should just worship God. And they said, well, the priest said that Jesus ate meat, and Prabhupada says, well, Jesus must have contradicted himself then, because they said, "Thou shalt not kill." And, we shouldn't, or he says, then this other priest was telling him, he says, "No, it's not 'thou shalt not kill,' it's 'thou shalt not murder.'" And so he said, well, if that's the case, then who was Jesus preaching to tell that, you shouldn't murder? He must have been talking to murderers, right? To the lowest rungs of people. And then, they murdered him anyway. So, what can you understand? And, the priest kind of left it at that. Oh, yeah, that line there is, kind of a sad one, I guess, right? Well, he asked the priest, "Are you in favor of killing?" And the priest says, "Well, the world's fallen. It's not a great place." And Prabhupada replies with, "Well, yeah, it's a fallen world, but we don't need to be among the fallen." So.
Second Pro.
Hare Krishna. Prabhupada replied, "Maybe Noah allowed it at the time of devastation, but that doesn't mean you always have to do it. To live in such a time, one can eat anything to stay alive. But now so many things are in abundance to keep healthy without maintaining a slaughterhouse. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, 'Protect the cows, it is the duty of the Vaishyas.'" Although Prabhupada willingly discussed with Christians, he admitted privately that to argue with them was a waste of time. They will never agree. He said, even if they are defeated, the best way to preach to people in general was through the chanting of Hare Krishna, as at the Rath Yatra festival. Chant, dance, take prasadam, and invite everyone to join. Anyway, he said, they don't even follow their teachings. One boy came to me and said he wanted to talk. He said, I'm a Christian, but I told him, you are not a Christian, thou shalt not kill. A man from Calcutta came to see Prabhupada, but as soon as the man began to say something about Krishna, Prabhupada interrupted. Krishna is something very difficult to understand. We are just trying to understand that there is a next life. But the Christians say there is no future life, the man said. At the end of this one, you either go to heaven or hell. But if they talk about going to heaven, said Prabhupada, then that is the next life. But knowledge of Krishna is only for the most perfect out of thousands among men. A Mr. Kumar, who sometimes lived in the London temple, visited Prabhupada with many questions. He wanted to work for ISKCON, he said, but required money to send his mother in India. No, Prabhupada told him, our men work 24 hours a day without a farthing. Mr. Kumar suggested ways to improve ISKCON. The devotees needed to study more, he said, especially Sanskrit, and become scholars. Prabhupada disagreed. All we need is dedication, he said. I'm not a great Sanskrit scholar, but I'm pulling on. And even the scholars say it is good. My Guru Maharaj, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, was illiterate. Still, his disciple, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, was the greatest scholar of the day. But when Gaur Kishore spoke, it was exactly from the Shastra. Our principle is not to take time to learn something and become expert and then preach. But whatever you know, preach. Class in the morning, class in the evening, and if they read my books, that is sufficient. So here,
can you that just copy that portion and post to Krishna Village?
Which portion?
Second Prabhu can do it. He's reading it, or you can do it. The portion where devotees, somebody's asking that he read devotees need to learn Sanskrit. Yeah.
This one?
What is Prabhupada's response like that? No.
This is the one.
The above you have to include the above paragraph also. What is the person's suggestion, and also what is Prabhupada's response? Both has to be included.
This one, right? From here.
I mean, you can continue summarizing. I just asked him to copy and paste. Thank you.
It's the can I do it later? Because it's your phone is in here, so I can't do it right now.
Yeah, that's fine.
So basically, if you go up a little bit, go down.
Yeah, sorry. Right here.
Yeah. So here, I think a little bit up. So here, when a priest gave the argument that Noah allowed meat eating or animal killing at the time of like the priest gave the example of the covenant with Noah. Prabhupada replies that at that time, which was the time of devastation, Noah probably did it, but it doesn't have to be done now because we have everything in abundance. Why do we need to kill animals for fulfilling our hunger? And in Bhagavad Gita also, he gives an example. Like Krishna says, Go Seva, protecting the cows, is the duty of the Vaishyas. And even though Prabhupada discussed with Christians, he basically didn't want to argue with them. He thought it was a waste of time. They will never agree when they are defeated. And he says the best way to preach is to chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, organize festivals, take prasadam, and invite everyone to join. And one day, a man from Calcutta came to see Prabhupada, and he was talking something about Krishna. Prabhupada said, understanding Krishna is very difficult. First, we should understand that there is a next life, that we are not the body and we are the soul. He says that the Christians say there is no future life. At the end of this life, you go to either heaven or hell. And Prabhupada says that, well, that is the next life. You are going to either heaven or hell. So that is the next life, which means that it is there. but he also says that the knowledge of Krishna it is most perfect, and it takes one among thousands to understand. And it is in the Bhagavad Gita also there is a verse that among thousands of men, there are thousands of men who try to understand Krishna, and among those thousands, there is only one who can understand him in complete. So, and Mr. Kumar, he used to come to the London temple and used to ask questions. He lived in the London temple, so he says that I need to send money to India. Can ISKCON, like I'll work for ISKCON, will they pay money? Prabhupada says no. All the men who work for us, they don't even take a single cent. And he was suggesting some ways to improve ISKCON. One of that was that we should study Sanskrit and become more scholars. Prabhupada disagrees and he says what we need is dedication. He says that I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, but I'm pulling it on, and even the Sanskrit scholar says it is good. And he gives an example of Prabhupada's Guru Maharaj, like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's Guru Maharaj, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, was illiterate. But his disciple Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was the greatest scholar of the day. And even when Gaur Kishore Babaji spoke, it was exactly from the Shastra. And then he says we should not take time to become perfect in something and preach. We should preach what we know, and and if you read my books, that is sufficient.
Plastic. Nipa Mataji.
One day, the devotees brought Prabhupada a newspaper clipping in which an Oxford professor, Dr. D. Zener, had said at a religion conference that Lord Krishna and his Bhagavad Gita teachings were immoral. Dr. Zener had said that a famous murderer was perhaps influenced by the Bhagavad Gita because Krishna says that the soul is immortal, so one can therefore kill. Srila Prabhupada was disgusted at the professor's ignorance. On his morning walk, he dictated to his secretary arguments to use in writing to Dr. Zener. George Harrison approached Prabhupada in a submissive mood similar to that of Prabhupada's disciples. Prabhupada and George took prasadam together, a special lunch of samosas, halwa, vegetables, sour cream, and puris. While they were enjoying the prasadam, Prabhupada mentioned that certain Vrindavana pandas, professional guides at a holy place, eat too much. Once one ate so much that he was practically dying, but he assured his son, at least I'm dying from eating and not from starving. To die of starvation is unglorious. Prabhupada smiled as he talked with George, gratefully acknowledging his donation of the manor. Have you seen my room? Prabhupada asked. It is actually your house, but my room. No, George protested, preferring the mood of the humble disciple. It is Krishna's house and your room. When George confided to Prabhupada that by taking to Krishna consciousness, he was losing friends, Prabhupada told him not to worry. He read to George from the Gita, where Krishna explains that he can be known only by devotional service. In the future, said George, ISKCON will be so large it will require executive management. Prabhupada, I have divided the world into 12 zones with 12 representatives. As long as they keep to the spiritual principles, Krishna will help them. Before leaving, George assured Prabhupada that he would help him increase his temples. Later, Prabhupada commented, George is getting inward hope from Krishna. One day, an old acquaintance dropped by, Alan Ginsberg, wearing denim suspenders and a faded shirt and carrying a little Indian-made harmonium. You're still chanting Hare Krishna? Prabhupada asked. Yes, Alan replied. I still chant Hare Krishna, but I also chant other things. Alan asked if Prabhupada would like to hear his chanting and playing. Prabhupada nodded. Alan began playing his harmonium and chanting Om. With each recitation of word Om, his voice went deeper. Om. So one day the devotees brought Prabhupada a clipping from the newspaper in which an Oxford professor had said about the religion conference that Lord Krishna and Bhagavad Gita teachings were immoral. And a famous murderer was perhaps influenced by it. saying that the soul is immortal, so one can therefore kill. And Prabhupada was highly disgusted with the professor's ignorance, and then he wanted to dictate his secretary some arguments against the doctor. And George Harrison approached Prabhupada in a very submissive mood. And Prabhupada and George took some prasadam, which was like samosas, halwas, vegetables, cream, and puris. When they were enjoying the prasadam, Prabhupada mentioned about Vrindavana pandas, which are like professional guides at holy place that eat too much. And they said they ate, one ate much that he was practically dying, but he assured his son, like, at least they are dying from eating, not from starving. And the died death due to starvation is unglorious. Prabhupada smiled as he was talking to George, gratefully acknowledging his donation of manna. And he said, have you seen my room? Prabhupada asked, it's your house, but my room. And George replied, no, protested no, preferring the mood of humble disciple. And it is Krishna's house and your room, he said. And when George confided to Prabhupada by taking Krishna consciousness, he said he was losing friends, and Prabhupada mentioned not to worry about it. He said he read to George from Gita that Krishna explains that he can be in the future known only by devotional service. George replied, in the future, ISKCON will be so large it will require executive management. And Prabhupada replied, he divided world into 12 zones, requiring 12 representatives. So as long as the principles of spirituality are followed, Krishna will help him. And before leaving, George assured Prabhupada that he would help him in increasing the temples. And Prabhupada said that George is getting inward hope from Krishna. And one day, one old acquaintance, Alan Ginsberg, appeared and wearing the denims and suspenders and faded shirt, and carrying an Indian-made harmonium. And Prabhupada asked him, "Are you still chanting Hare Krishna?" Alan replied, "Yes, I still chant Hare Krishna and also I chant other things." And Alan asked if Prabhupada would like to hear. And Prabhupada said yes, and Alan began his harmonium and chanting Om. And with each of his recitation, the word Om went deeper and deeper.
Pranathur.
Yeah, Hare Krishna. When the is that where I start when the chant was over?
Yeah.
When the chant was over, Prabhupada began to laugh. You can chant whatever you want to chant, he said, but just keep chanting Hare Krishna. As long as you are chanting Hare Krishna, then everything else is all right. Prabhupada then allowed many devotees to join them for a big blissful kirtan. Through George Harrison, another famous pop singer and musician, Donovan was drawn to come and see the renowned leader of the Hare Krishna movement. Donovan, accompanied by a musician friend and their two girlfriends in miniskirts, sat in awkward silence before Prabhupada. Prabhupada spoke, "There is a verse in the Vedas that says that music is the highest form of education." And he began to explain how a musician could serve Krishna. "You should do like your friend George," Prabhupada said. "We will give you the themes and you can write the songs." Prabhupada said that anything, even money, could be used in the service of Krishna. "But money is material," Donovan's girlfriend interrupted. "What do you know that what is material and spiritual?" Prabhupada said. He turned to Donovan. "Do you understand?" Donovan humbly replied that he was thick-headed but trying. Donovan's girlfriend then leaned over and whispered something into his ear, whereupon Donovan stood up and said, "Well, we have to go now." Prabhupada insisted that at least they first take some prasadam. As soon as the guest left, Prabhupada and his disciple began to laugh. Prabhupada said, "She was thinking," and he encouraged his disciples to finish the sentence. "Yes," said Yogeshwara, "she was thinking that if Krishna gets him, then she will lose him." Prabhupada so much liked preaching to important guests that he wanted to continue doing so wherever he traveled. "Wherever I shall go now," Prabhupada wrote in a letter to a disciple, "this policy of important men being invited to talk with me about our Krishna consciousness movement should be implemented." A month passed at the manor, and still several weeks remained before Janmashtami and the deity installation. So when Bhagwan requested Prabhupada to come for a visit to Paris and install Radha Krishna deities, Prabhupada agreed. Should I stop here, Prabhu?
Maybe you can read this one more paragraph.
Okay. Paris, August 9, 1973. The devotees had arranged an official city hall reception for Srila Prabhupada. In the presence of the mayor of Paris and his government entourage, Srila Prabhupada said that if the government leaders do not teach the citizens genuine God consciousness, then they are not responsible leaders. Reporting this talk in the next day's newspaper, a news writer stated that the Swami even criticized Napoleon Bonaparte. So, George Harrison's friend Donovan had came to meet Prabhupada, and he came along with his musician friend. He came with this and their two girlfriends, and Prabhupada told them that music is the highest form of education and that it can be used to serve Krishna, and he was telling them that they should follow or do like their friend George did, and Prabhupada further added that they'll provide the themes and they can write the songs, and that even money can be used in Krishna's service. But Donovan's girlfriend interrupted and saying that money is material. Prabhupada immediately rebuffed, saying, what do you know about material and what is material and spiritual? And turned to Donovan asking if he understood. And Donovan was humble and replied that, he was thick-headed and was trying. And Donovan's girlfriend, whispered into Donovan's ear, and then they decided to leave. And Prabhupada insisted, them to take some prasadam before they leave. And when they left, Prabhupada and the disciples began to, laugh and were talking. And then Yogeshwara, Prabhupada's disciple, said that she was thinking that, if Krishna gets Donovan, that then she will lose him. So Prabhupada liked so much preaching to, important guests, and he wanted to continue that wherever he traveled to meet important people and preach to them. And this policy of he wrote in a letter to his disciple that that important men should be invited to talk with him in the Krishna consciousness movement. And a month passed at the Bhaktivedanta manor, and several weeks remained before Janmashtami and the deity installation. Then Bhagwan requested Prabhupada to visit Paris to install the Radha Krishna deities, for which Prabhupada agreed. And then in Paris, August 9th, the devotees arranged an official reception for Srila Prabhupada in the city hall. And in the presence of the mayor of Paris and his government entourage, Prabhupada said that, it's very important that the government leaders should teach the citizens about genuine God consciousness. Otherwise, they're not responsible leaders. And taking this information in the newspapers the next day, the reporters wrote that Prabhupada criticized Napoleon Bonaparte.
Prashanti Mataji.
Bhagavan, we had just moved into our new temple at 4 Rue Le Sur Paris, and we had received 48-inch Radha and Krishna deities. Prabhupada had Pradyumna chanting the mantras and pouring the substances on the deities, while Prabhupada himself looked on from his Vyasasana giving directions. I was assisting, and at one point I turned around and saw Srila Prabhupada standing right next to me, taking the substances in his own hands and smearing them over the lotus-like face of Srimati Radharani. After the deities were installed on the altar, Srila Prabhupada came up and offered the arti and assisted him by handing him the articles. After the installation, we went up to Srila Prabhupada's room and very anxiously requested him to please give a name for the deities. He sat back in his chair and said that devotees will be known as Radha Paris Ishwara. He then went on to say that in India, people look to England for education and Paris for sense gratification. He began to laugh and said that Krishna has come to Paris in order to get some gopis, some French girls. Because the faces of the women in Paris are considered the most beautiful, Radharani is so beautiful. Prabhupada said, just like a Paris girl. And Krishna has come here to find out this most beautiful of all the gopis. So he is Paris Ishwara. August 15th, Prabhupada returned to London and the latest mail from India. The legal complication had arisen regarding the deed for ISKCON's land in Hyderabad. Prabhupada wrote his disciples Mahasma, cautioning him to avoid becoming entangled in another Bombay affair. When Prabhupada also received word that the temple construction was progressing in Vrindavana, he replied, I am pleased to hear how you are completely absorbed in the project of our Vrindavana temple and taxing your brain how it can be carried out. I am also always praying to Krishna that he may give you intelligence to carry it out rightly. In a letter to the disciple in Hawaii, Prabhupada apologized for not replying to a letter. I was very busy in Bombay for the Juhu land of Mr. N. Now he is dead and gone, but he had created so many obstacles. Still, there is discrepancy. But I hope this will be squared up without delay. So Bhagavan says that they have gathered at the new temple. Everybody was moved to the new temple. And there is a 48-inch Radha and Krishna deities. And Prabhupada asked Pradyumna to do the Abhishek. And he's pouring substances on the deities one after another. And Prabhupada is giving was on his Vyasasana giving directions. And Bhagwan was assisting Pradyumna. And at one point, Prabhupada came and smeared on the lotus-like face of Srimati Radharani, and then he also offered and assisted them in handing the articles. And when Prabhupada went back to his room, they requested Prabhupada to name the deities, and he named them Radha Paris Ishwara. And he laughed, and after that he laughed, saying that in India, everybody look up to England for education and Paris for sense gratification, because they believe that they have beautiful French girls over there, and Radharani is so beautiful, and Krishna also wanted to get beautiful French girls, gopis over there, and that's why he is Paris Ishwara. Prabhupada started replying to many letters that he got when he returned to London. So there was looks like a litigation is being started in Hyderabad. So he cautioned Mahasma not to make it a Bombay affair again. and he was pleased to know that temple construction in Vrindavana is being carried out very well. And he said he was praying to Krishna to give them intelligence to do it nicely. And he apologized to a disciple in Hawaii for not writing a letter. And he explained him that he was very busy in Bombay because of the Juhu land and because of the litigation. And he hopes this will be squared up without delay.
Papa, will you read? He's there.
Yes, that's it.
I don't know. I was talking to my dad. If he was there. Okay, it's fine. All right. I was very busy in Bombay for the Juhu land of Mr. N. Oh, sorry. I already read that. Writing to Tamal Krishna Goswami in Bombay, Prabhupada was as attentive as ever to the ongoing troubles there. Although the devotees remained in the possession of the land and had rebuilt their temporary temple, no purchase settlement was in sight. If Miss N is not going to sell us the land, then what next step we have to adopt? We fixed a criminal case against her for attempting to dispossess us from the land. And what happened to that case? The idea is that if she is not going to sell the land to us, and at the same time does not return our money with damages and interest, and occasionally tries to dispossess us from the land, then what steps we have to take? She's giving us so much trouble and botheration. And Prabhupada wrote to his disciples in Mayapur. Yes, Mayapur construction must be completely finished before I can return. The next time I come there must be no more workers or carpenters with their tack sound. I will continue to stay in Mayapur, but the hammering sounds drove me away. When you're completely finished, I'll go there, otherwise not. Prabhupada also answered dozens of letters from America, where the devotees were becoming more and more keen to distribute his books. The letters contained very crucial questions that only Prabhupada could solve. How important was book distribution? Could the devotees abandon their robes and wear regular Western clothes to better distribute books in public? Was chanting on the streets more important than book distribution? What about taking buses and vans around the country? Could they travel with deities in the van? The devotees generally mentioned their own viewpoint in their letters to Prabhupada, and yet they respectfully waited his definitive reply. So Prabhupada just continues with his letter to his disciple in Hawaii. And then he writes to Tamal Krishna Goswami in Bombay, saying that what they should do, because they had possession of the land, but now there's no purchase settlement in sight. And this Miss Anne is giving them so much trouble because they tried a case against her, but if she doesn't sell them the land and all this other money, if she doesn't return the money or keeps on trying to take the land from them, what steps they have to take? So Prabhupada is asking Tamal Krishna Goswami Maharaj, because she's been a really pain to them. And then Prabhupada wrote to his disciples in Mayapur saying that by the time Prabhupada comes, there should be no construction left. Prabhupada would have stayed in Mayapur, but because of the sounds of workers and carpenters, he did not like to stay there because he did not like the sound. And Prabhupada was also answering dozens of letters from America, which would only be able to answered by him because they were more about the ISKCON and a deeper question how important was book distribution? Should one do Harinam more or book distribution? If it was okay for them to wear Western clothes when they distribute books, and so on. AJ,
The Krishna conscious movement was now big, with potential for growing much bigger. And within ISKCON, Prabhupada's will was so powerful that a single letter from him would establish a policy for years to come. Prabhupada appeared to be sitting quietly in his room at the manor, following his daily routine of bathing, eating, and meeting evening guests, yet at the same time he was directing thousands of young men and women all over the world and sending them into action in the war against Maya. There is no objection to going in Western clothes in order to distribute my books. It is not necessary that we always wear the robes, but we should always keep Sika and Tilak. However, a wig or a hat may be worn as you describe. we have to take whatever is the most favorable. We have to take whatever is the favorable position for executing Krishna consciousness. Do not forget our principles, but sometimes we may adopt such means in order to distribute books. However, or somehow or other, distribute books, and if you can impress people to Geez, let me try again. Somehow or other, distribute. Oh, yeah, I just lost the whole sentence. There we go. Somehow or other, distribute books, and if you can impress people a little to chant, then it does not matter about your dress. The devotees continue to request clarification as to how far the ends justify the means in fulfilling Prabhupada's order to distribute books profusely. Srila Prabhupada, being free of any material motivation, could clearly see the Krishna conscious thing to do. Regarding the question you have raised about traveling Sankirtan parties and selling books, yes, we want money. So that is real preaching, selling books. Who can speak better than the books? At least whoever buys, he will look over. The real preaching is selling books. You should know the tactic to sell without irritating. What your lecture will do for 3 minutes, but if he reads one page, his life may be turned. We don't want to irritate anyone, however. If he goes away by your aggressive tactics, then you are nonsense, and it is your failure. Neither you could sell a book, neither he would remain. But if he buys a book, that is the real successful preaching. That is the certificate of my Guru Maharaj. If someone brahmachari would sell a one-page magazine, if one of our brahmachari, it's Pace, right? Pesa, yeah, okay. Yeah, I got it. Sorry. Would sell one Pesa magazine. If one of our brahmacharis would go and sell a few copies, he would be very, very glad and say, "Oh, you are so nice." So distribution of literature is our real preaching. Now, if you cannot handle the matter nicely, that is your fault. But the success of your preaching will be substantiated by how many books are sold. Anything you want to sell, you have to canvass a little. So he gives some money for the service of Krishna. That is his good luck, and he gets the chance to read some transcendental knowledge. But if you only irritate and he gets away, that is your less knowledge. So this is, Prabhupada trying to, kind of really just nail home the point, right? As this movement's getting bigger and bigger, Prabhupada is staying at Bhaktivedanta Manor, and he's doing all of his daily stuff. He's going throughout his day, but then he's also kind of behind the scenes directing all these people, all these devotees out there, and giving them different missions and different tasks to do to in the war against Maya. And so he says, hey, you know what? Yeah, there's no problem if you go out and you wear Western clothes when you're distributing books. It's not you don't need to wear robes, but you should at least keep a Sika, Sika and Tilak. But you can wear a wig if you need to, which I think is kind of funny. But he said you should take whatever the most favorable position is for executing Krishna consciousness. So you might have to you can do this or that in order to distribute the books, as long as you maintain the principles of the movement. And so you go out there, distribute books, and if you can get as long as you're getting people to read the books and chant a little bit, then it doesn't matter what you're wearing. And again, the devotees are trying to figure out how far can they go, right? Like, at what point are we, pushing too hard? And, so he says, yep, we want their money, obviously, right? We want money because that's how we keep this thing going. The books are how we spread the message. And you might be well-versed in this, but, you what you say to this guy might stick with him for 3 minutes, where if he has this book, if he reads a page, it might stick with him for a lifetime. So he says, go out there, you don't want to lecture people though, right? And you don't want to be too aggressive. And if you are too aggressive and someone turns away because of that, that's on you. That's your fault, and it's your nonsense. So, again, he then tells, he says that the brahmacharis of his guru would go out and they'd sell one. If they'd sell one magazine, if they would go out and sell a couple, Prabhupada's guru would say, "Oh, you're very nice. This is very good." So he says that the distribution of literature is the real preaching. It's how you really get the message across to people. So he says, it takes some work. You might not be good at it first, but go out there and do it. And you get a little money for the service of Krishna. and someone else gains the opportunity to gain some transcendental knowledge from these books. But if you irritate him and he goes away, that's your fault.
Second proof.
Prabhupada's instructions were so important to his disciples that a letter from him was as effective as a personal visit. By such letters, he maintained the lives and affairs of his disciples all over the world. Each day in the late morning, he would have his secretary read aloud each incoming letter, and usually he would dictate the answer without delay. He had often said that the Vani or order of the Guru was more important than the Vapu or personal presence. Thus, by his letters, he established and illuminated the path of Krishna consciousness for his sincere followers. In America, now Prabhupada's preaching was primarily through the distribution of his books, whereas in India, it was through establishing temples. Yet both methods were one and the same to him. And although his vision encompassed the whole world, he felt and described himself as only the humble servant of his spiritual master. Whether sitting peacefully on the lawn of the manor and teasing one of the little children, or directing one of his lieutenants to drop thousands and millions of books into the laps of the conditioned souls. Whether meditating with great energy on the next phrase in his Srimad Bhagavatam purports, or worrying about what Mrs. N was conspiring in Bombay, he always tried to serve his Guru Maharaj. Srila Prabhupada received an emergency phone call from Bombay. Giriraj wanted him to come and personally settle with Mrs. N the purchase of the Juhu land. Giriraj had consulted a new lawyer, Mr. Bakil, who felt that Prabhupada must be present for there to be a settlement. Another ISKCON lawyer, Mr. Chandawal, also advised the Srila Prabhupada come immediately to Bombay. Giriraj therefore had telephoned Prabhupada begging him to please come and settle the matter with Mrs. N once for and all. Prabhupada agreed. He would remain in London one more week until Janmashtami, then he would return to Bombay. August 21st, Mr. M. Ragostra, the Indian ambassador to England, attended the Janmashtami Day celebration and introduced Srila Prabhupada, expressing his appreciation of Prabhupada's great work. Prabhupada spoke describing the advent of Krishna as the key to peace for the troubled material world, especially in India. He said, "We have got so much asset for understanding God. Everything is there, ready-made, but we won't accept. So what is the remedy for such disease? We are searching after peace, but we won't accept anything which is actually giving us peace. This is our disease." So the Krishna consciousness movement is trying to awaken the dormant Krishna consciousness in everyone's heart. Otherwise, how could these Europeans and Americans and other countrymen who had never even heard of Krishna 4 or 5 years ago be taken to Krishna consciousness so seriously? Therefore, Krishna consciousness is there in everyone's heart. I'll summarize now. So, Prabhupada instructions to disciples, were so important that a letter from him was effective as a personal visit, and he used to give advices and address the concerns of all his disciples all over the world. In the late morning, his secretary would read aloud every letter, and then Prabhupada would dictate the answer right then. And he also said that the Vani, which is the order of the Guru, is more important than the Vapu, which is the personal presence. And in America, Prabhupada's preaching was primarily through book distribution, whereas in India, it was through establishing temples. And both these methods were the same to Prabhupada. He always felt himself and described himself as the humble servant of his spiritual master. Whether he was sitting on the lawn of the manor, whether he was teasing one of the little children, or whether he was asking one of his disciples to distribute books, he was always trying to serve his Guru Maharaj. Whenever he was also thinking about translating the Srimad Bhagavatam or writing about his purports or what was worrying is worrying things in Bombay about Mr. Sen's conspiracy. One day, Srila Prabhupada received a phone call from Giriraj where he wanted him to come and personally settle the issue of the Juhu land with Mr. Sen. And the ISKCON lawyers, Mr. Bakil and Mr. Chandawal, advised him to do so. Prabhupada agreed that he would come after the Janmashtami. And on the day of the Janmashtami celebration, the Indian ambassador to England, M. Ragostra, introduced Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada spoke saying that that in India there is so much so many things available to understand God, like we have all the Vedas and everything is ready made, but no one would accept. And what is the remedy for such disease? We are all searching for peace in all the material things, but that is not actually giving us peace. That is our disease. And this Krishna consciousness movement is trying to awaken. It's already there in everyone's heart, and this movement is trying to awaken that. And without that, there is these Europeans and Americans who have never heard about Krishna 4 or 5 years ago would not be taking Krishna consciousness so seriously. So he stresses that Krishna consciousness is there in everyone's heart.
Nipa Mataji.
Prabhupada recited prayers from Brahma Samhita, describing the sublime eternal existence of Krishna on his eternal planet Krishna Loka. But Krishna is also everywhere, he explained, and if you are a devotee, then you can catch him. If you want to catch him, he comes forward 10 times more than you desire. Therefore, we simply have to receive him. This deity worship in this temple means worshipping Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He has very kindly accepted to assume a form which you can handle. Therefore, do not think that we have installed a marble statue. The rascals will say they are heathens. No, we are worshipping Krishna personally. Krishna has kindly assumed this form because we cannot see the gigantic Krishna or how Krishna is everywhere. Remain 24 hours a day in Krishna's service. This is the purpose of installing the deity. Bombay, September 15, 1973. The day after his arrival, Srila Prabhupada met with Mrs. N's solicitors and heard their offers. The situation had begun to look hopeful, and yet the conclusion eluded them. Mrs. N had become changed by the public reaction to her attempt to demolish the temple. If Prabhupada would pay the full balance of 12 lakhs of rupees for the land in one payment, she told her lawyer she would agree. Prabhupada was agreeable but did not want to arrange to collect his money until he was certain that Mrs. N was actually serious. Mr. Asnani, a Bombay lawyer and ISKCON life member, regularly met with Mrs. N, persuading her to cooperate with Prabhupada. Her lawyers concurred. Yet after Prabhupada had been in Bombay for several weeks, no meeting with Mrs. N had taken place. Once Mr. Asnani went to bring Mrs. N to meet with Prabhupada, but she was not feeling well. Day after day, Mr. Asnani would tell Prabhupada Mrs. N will come tomorrow. Prabhupada became disappointed at the procrastination, and seeing this, his secretaries told Mr. Asnani that although they knew he meant well, they were inclined to have their own other lawyers handle the case. Mr. Asnani asked for another 48 hours to close the deal and execute the conveyance. Mrs. N was at her other home where she had just recovered from her illness. When Mr. Asnani invited Mataji, he begged, "My Guru Maharaj is leaving tomorrow. If you don't come tonight, the problem with the land will go on another year." Mrs. N agreed, and around 9 p.m., she and Mr. Asnani arrived at the home of Mr. Bogilal Patel, where Srila Prabhupada was holding a program of Kirtana and Bhagavata discourses. Prabhupada was on the roof preparing to lecture, but hearing that Mrs. N had arrived, he interrupted the meeting and came down to his room to talk with her. They talked briefly, and Prabhupada excused himself and returned to the roof to lecture. So, Prabhupada recited prayers from Brahma Samhita, and he described the eternal existence of Krishna on the eternal planet Krishna Loka, which was sublime. And he said Krishna is also everywhere. And if you are a devotee, then you can catch him. And if you want to catch him, he comes forward 10 times more than you desire. Therefore, we simply have to receive him. And the deity worship in a temple meant worshipping Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead. And he was kindly accepted assumed the form in which you can handle. And therefore, do not. Yeah, he said it's not just a marble statue. And he said the heathens, they are the heathens who know we are worshipping Krishna personally. Krishna has assumed this form, and we we cannot see the gigantic Krishna. How Krishna is everywhere and remain 24 hours in the service. This is the purpose of installing the deity. And in Bombay, in September 15, 1973, after the arrival of Srila Prabhupada, Mrs. N heard solicitors and he met with Mrs. N solicitors and heard the offers, and situation was looking hopeful. And it was like if Prabhupada could arrange for the full balance of 12 lakhs of the land, she told the lawyer she would agree. And Prabhupada was agreeable to arrange, but he did not wanted to arrange to collect his money until he was certain that Mrs. N was actually serious. And then there's Mr. Asnani. He's a Bombay lawyer and he's also a life member of ISKCON. And he met with Mrs. N to persuade to cooperate with Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was staying in Bombay for several weeks, but there was no meeting arranged. So Mr. Asnani went to ask Mrs. N to meet Prabhupada, but she was not feeling well. And she kept saying that like Mrs. N will come tomorrow. And Prabhupada became disappointed about the procrastination. And he told Mr. Asnani that we knew he meant well, they were inclined, but Mr. Asnani asked for 48 hours to close the deal. Mrs. N was at her home and she was recovering, and Mr. Asnani like literally said, Mataji, he begged, like, my Guru Maharaj is leaving tomorrow. If you don't come tonight, the problem for the land will go on for another year. And so Mrs. N agreed to meet Mr. Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, and along with Mr. Asnani, she came to Bogilal Patel's house where there was a Kirtana and Bhagavata discourse going on. And Prabhupada was on the roof. So after hearing Mrs. N is there, so he came to meet her and talk with her. He talked briefly and excused himself again to go to the roof and continue his lecture.
Hare Krishna. So can I read now? Around midnight, he returned to his room again. Mrs. N was still waiting. She burst into tears and bowed at Prabhupada's feet. I'm sorry for everything I have done. She sobbed. Please forgive me. She promised to do whatever Prabhupada wanted. Wow. Sudden transformation. I think association probably there. Prabhupada looked at her compassionately and understood her heart. You are just like my daughter, he said. Don't worry, I'll take care of you. I will see to all of your needs for the rest of your life. And Prabhupada said he still accepted the very terms she had proposed, that he paid the remaining balance of 12 lakhs plus 50,000 rupees compensation for the delay. Prabhupada and Mrs. N had set November 1st as the tentative deadline for the final signing of the conveyance. Shortly after their meeting, Prabhupada moved from Bogilal Patel's to the home of Mr. Sethi, who were working intensely to tackle the remaining problems, such as getting C Company to withdraw their claim. Oh, nice. Next, he moved to the home of Mr. C.M. Khatau, just 2 blocks from the Hare Krishna land, where he lived in a summer cottage, a simple structure with bamboo frame and chatai walls. Usually, conveyances had to be signed in the presence of the city registrar at his office downtown, but Mr. Asnani had arranged for the registrar to come to Prabhupada's place. At 6:30 in the evening, Srila Prabhupada was seated at his low desk between 2 windows. His back against the wall. Mrs. N and her lawyers, the registrar, Mr. Asnani, Mr. and Mrs. Sethi, and about 8 devotees were present, and the full room grew warm and stuffy. Mrs. N sat at Prabhupada's right as the registrar prepared the papers for signing. Srila Prabhupada sat gravely. The room was silent except for the sound of papers rustling and a pen scratching. Preparing and signing the conveyance papers took more than 20 minutes. Prabhupada paid Mrs. N, who then signed the conveyance. The land was legally ISKCON's. Hari Bol, Sisi Radhas, Ras Bihari ki jai. I didn't know that this was, I thought, at the uh, the court, they said, okay, whatever has been built, I thought that's still over. That day it was over. I didn't know that it was still pending all this paperwork and everything. So I was hearing that she was delaying, she was neglecting. So finally, I don't know what made her, she accepted to meet Prabhupada. And now when she came, so here, right? Okay, here. Okay, here. This one. So now around midnight, he returned to his home. Oh, when she came, actually, hearing Mr. N had arrived, he interrupted the meeting and came down to his room to talk with her. They talked briefly, and Prabhupada excused himself and returned to the roof for lecture. Around midnight, he returned to his room again. So he stayed for whole midnight. So Mrs. N was still waiting. She burst into tears. And so this is a great, I don't know how this happened. Maybe she was feeling guilty, or just some association there that transformed her heart. And she did accepted this. I'm sorry for everything I have done. She must have influenced her husband to do so. Because at the beginning itself, if you remember, when Mr. N was agreeing to sign, she was kind of saying, oh, you're giving for less money. So she may be behind the scene doing all these things. So she is begged forgiveness. Now look at the Prabhupada's response. This is a compassionate. As soon as he says, I am, please forgive me, Prabhupada's heart melts. And he says that, no, you are just like my daughter. How spiritual relationship is, so wonderful. And don't worry, I'll take care of this. And Prabhupada is genuinely talking. It's not. This is not a political statement, hypocrisy or anything. So I will see all of your needs for the rest of your life. And Prabhupada said he accepts all the terms he has proposed, and he will pay also now 50,000 rupees compensation for the delay. And they set the date for November 1st, and they all meet. Prabhupada also did made sure C company to withdraw their claim, because that could put in trouble. Already something is there. I don't know how he worked on it. So he moved to home of Mr. C.M. Katau, just 2 blocks from the Hare Krishna land, and lived there. And the registrar came. Generally, they have to go there and do, but here it seems like they have a good contact. Registrars generally won't come. I don't know how registrar came. The registrar is the head of the office who actually for that land dealings. So all these people are gathered, including the devotees, and everybody is silent. Seriously, Prabhupada is grave. Seriously, this efforts are going on. Now, finally, the land was legally ISKCON. ISKCON Juhu ki jai. Okay, if you all share some of your reflections, so that will help me. Though I was hearing, but partially. It's your turn. No. Anyone wants to share anything?
Yeah, I had read a part about, where Prabhupada was talking about the importance of book distribution, and just how, how that's the real preaching, and how, the devotee might sit on a street corner and kind of give a quick little spiel, like a little lecture, and it might, go kind of one ear and out the other for the person that's listening to it. But if they buy one of Prabhupada's books, and they'll have that there, and they'll have that forever. And as they read it, it'll sink in more, and they'll get this this transcendental knowledge from that book, and that enlightenment from that book. And he stresses like, hey, that's the real preaching. That's the way we get the word out, is through getting these books out to people. So.
Yeah.
We also read about Prabhupada's discussions with the priest in London, where they were discussing about meat eating and thou shall not kill. So they give an example of Noah, the covenant, where so Prabhupada explains that at that time maybe he had no other option, but that doesn't mean that when we have everything in abundance we should do that. And also he tells to his devotees that we cannot change them, so it is better not to argue with them. Basically we should just focus on and then Mr. Kumar, he was talking about that he was giving a suggestion that we should become Sanskrit scholars, and Prabhupada says that is not required. I was not a scholar, but even the Sanskrit scholars appreciate my work. Whatever we know, we should preach. It is not that we'll become an expert and wait for it and then start preaching. Whatever we know, we should preach.
We also argument about killing and murdering. Okay, assume it is a thou shalt not murder. So the Prabhupada's argument is, what kind of people he was preaching? Was it preaching people are murdering them, human beings that time? That's why he made the law that you have to tell human beings you should not murder. Just I was hearing. So in that case, this philosophy is not applicable to everybody then. And why we are preaching those people who are not murdering, are still giving the laws, there's no value there. So it's a very illogical statement. And people, he said, not you can kill, but you can kill animals, but you cannot kill the humans. Okay, 8:43. Anything else? Thank you so much. We'll continue. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Jai Hare Krishna.
Everything okay, Ajay?